A German Air Force plane on its way to New York. Its secret mission? To carry out Hitler's final plan of destruction and transform the skyline of New York into a towering inferno. It could have happened on September 11th, half a century before that date would indelibly burn itself into our collective memory. This film reveals for the first time Hitler's secret plans to attack the United States.
He was a dreamer of considerable ability. He dreamed of a lot of things.
I do as much damage as possible, and the other side will back down eventually.
Hitler's engineers worked feverishly to develop innovative weapons of mass destruction.
Does constructing weapons make you an evil person?
There is no taboo that remains unbroken.
It would have been feasible to find volunteers to go on suicide missions.
We were willing to fly any mission, but we did hope to have at least a small chance of surviving.
Hitler's insane dream was to use suicide attacks to bring the superpower United States to its knees.
Terror. I'll lay my own life on the line, 100%, if it means I can kill many times as many people someplace else.
I think he dreamed of the whole city just disappearing in a firestorm.
In 1937. Hitler has been in power for 4 years. The scenario of a coming world war is already taking form. Hitler begins seeking contact with the Air Force. It will play a special role in his plans to conquer the world. Arms deals worth millions are at stake. Augsburg, November 23, 1937. On this date, Hitler paid a visit to the Messerschmitt airplane factory. Willy Messerschmitt, one of the leading airplane engineers of the Third Reich, realizes which way the wind is blowing. Whoever can deliver the weapons Hitler needs for the wars he is planning to wage stands to win the race in the arms industry. At the end of the day-long visit, Messerschmitt leads Hitler to a secret hangar. He stands before an enormous long-range bomber. Hitler is impressed. This, Messerschmitt explains to him, is an airplane he could use to attack America.
Because Hitler was not an aircraft engineer, or even someone who understood technology, you couldn't persuade him with words or statistics, but you could show him visually. You can have this, and it would look like this or this. After all, the best method for motivating someone to buy something is a mock-up.
The dummy of the long-range bomber led to a cataclysmic misjudgment. From then on, Hitler believed he could wage a war of aggression against the United States. But it was still too early to take on the world's greatest power. So Hitler attempted to placate the United States into thinking it had nothing to fear. He was a wolf in lamb's clothing and pretended to want peace.
Und hier erkläre ich feierlich, dass alle irgendwie verbreitete Behauptungen über einen beabsichtigten deutschen Angriff oder Eingriff auf oder in amerikanische Gebiete plumper Schwindel oder grobe Unwahrheit sind.
Hitler's word was not considered a really reliable word. So, in spite of telling Roosevelt that he would never invade or be aggressive against America, no one believed him. This was not a coin that had much value.
The White House took the threat of an attack by Hitler's Germany quite seriously. The U.S. military sketched out a horrible potential scenario. A transport Zeppelin could carry German airplanes across the ocean to bomb New York. September 1st, 1939. Hitler's invasion of Poland begins. As a result, England and France declare war against Hitler. The raw materials they need are supplied by ships coming from the United States. The shipping routes in the Atlantic become a theater of war. German submarines begin torpedoing English freighters. Hitler expressly forbids his navy from attacking American ships. Under no circumstances does he wish to provoke the United States, not until he has finished preparations for a war with the American superpower. Meanwhile, the German industrial base competes for defense contracts. The engineers let their imaginations run wild. Many of them take the initiative and begin developing weapons for future battles, including those to take place across the Atlantic. Messerschmitt Project Office, December 20th, 1940. Willy Messerschmitt orders his engineers to develop a fully functional airplane based on the mock-up of the America bomber. Messerschmitt is putting all his eggs in one basket. He knows the only way he can beat the competition in the race for defense contracts is by being the first to deliver the bombers Hitler wants for his attack on the United States. The problem is, never before has an airplane succeeded in flying across the Atlantic and back without taking on extra fuel.
At that time, it was not possible for us to fly our planes from America to England. They had to go from America to Newfoundland to England. So the extent to which they could build a plane to go without refueling all the way to America would have been very difficult.
As far as I know, the task was to achieve 11,000 kilometers and a load capacity of 3 tons. That was something no other airplane had ever been able to do, but the Me-264 was very close to accomplishing it.
In the meantime, Hitler and Goering began developing alternatives to sending bombers directly from Germany to attack the United States. They planned to conquer Iceland, which could serve as a stepping stone in the Atlantic. German bombers would then be able to take off from there and attack America.
Because that would have enabled him to cut off about a third of the distance between Europe and America, if I remember my geography. The distance would have been shortened by about a third if he had a logistical base. That means if you have a base there, you can land, fuel up, station equipment, make repairs. It would be like a land-based aircraft carrier, so to speak.
It made all sense. I mean, in war plans, you plan everything. And then comes the problem of priorities. Do you have the ability, do you have the equipment, do you have the people, do you have the resources to do it, and are those resources being used for the best purpose or not?
Hitler orders the Commander-in-Chief of the Navy, Admiral Raeder, to present plans for conquering Iceland. The invasion plan is codenamed Icarus. American intelligence agents never learned of these plans, but Washington foresaw the weakness Iceland could represent. And Roosevelt beat Hitler to the punch. He succeeded in stationing American troops on the island.
It was considered a possibility which we should deny to the Germans. You don't have to know their plans, because logically you can figure out it's one of the possibilities, and therefore you should deny them that possibility.
With the war between military strategists and secret services already underway, Roosevelt began probing Congress, looking for a political majority for a war against Hitler's Germany. The American public was split between opponents and proponents of the war. An unusual demonstration was held in Madison Square Garden in New York.
there were an enormous amount of Germans who were pro-Nazi and who wanted Germany to win the war. They were playing on 86th Street, the movie about the conquest of the Germans over the French, Sieg im Westen, I think it was called. And there were demonstrations, pro-German demonstrations, certainly in Yorkville, which was the center of the German population. And there were a lot of Irish who also were very anti-English. And there was a very large portion of the population who did not want America to intervene in the war.
At the grassroots level, the Deutsche Amerikanische Bund was active as the U.S. extension of the Nazi Party. For the FBI, members of the group, mostly Americans of German ancestry, were considered potential agents of Hitler's and therefore a threat to the domestic security of the United States. In one famous case, they succeeded in cracking a German spy ring. Using a hidden camera, the FBI filmed German agents passing on secret documents and showed the film to the American populace.
Walking into this trap is Colonel Fritz Duquesne, a leader of the spy ring and a professional German spy. He is removing diagrams of the M1 rifle, an airborne tank, a PT boat, and a late model plane which he had concealed in his sock. The important-looking man is Hartwig Kleiss, who worked for the United States line as a cook. In these pictures, Kleiss has brought to Sawyer the blueprints of the steamship America, showing the plans of her secret gun emplacements.
But not all of Germany's spies were discovered. They were able to scout out potential attack targets in the United States. Plans were created specifying which American industrial plants it would be necessary to bomb in order to prevent the United States from upgrading its munitions. Now, the Reich's Air Force Ministry is ready to give the go-ahead for the America bomber. Messerschmitt has achieved his goal. He is expected to deliver the first 30 planes within a year's time. Washington, September 11, 1941. The White House knows nothing of Hitler's America bomber plans. Roosevelt announces to the people that the greatest danger comes from another direction.
And within the past few weeks, the discovery was made of secret air landing fields in Colombia, within easy range of the Panama Canal.
Colombia to America is not that far off, I mean, particularly. But there probably were some plans, but nothing really effective. And I don't think Roosevelt could have thought for 1 minute that he could enter the war on that pretext. A possible bombing attack from Colombia to the United States, a possible, could not be used as a casus belli. And I'm sure Roosevelt was looking for a casus belli.
In his search for a reason to go to war, Roosevelt attempted to impress upon the American people the extent of the threat Hitler represented.
Conspiracy has followed conspiracy. His intrigues, his plots, his machinations, his sabotage in this new world are all known to the government of the United States.
Paranoia has always been a disease, which comes very easily under those circumstances. I'm sure there was an enormous amount of paranoia.
The paranoia was so widespread that Washington ordered its embassies in South America to prepare blacklists of ethnic German immigrants. Several thousand of them were subsequently handed over to the FBI by South American governments and incarcerated in the United States. Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941. Japanese aircraft attacked the most important military outpost of the United States in the Pacific, killing more than 2,000 military personnel. It was the first time America had been attacked within its own territory. A traumatic experience that immediately brought about a change in the political views of the American public.
Pearl Harbor, from one day to another, America knew it was in the war. There was no longer any doubt. Don't forget, up to then there were all kinds of movements for and against. The minute we were in the war, the Americans who were non-interventionists no longer had an argument. The decision had been taken.
As a consequence of the Japanese attack, Hitler also decides to declare war on the United States. This was a development no one in Washington had anticipated at the time.
He had enough enemies, he had enough problems, he had enough fronts he had to fight on, and it was surprising even to us. I think Hitler thought that seeing the Japanese war machine, that America would be so busy with the Japanese that they could not devote many resources to Europe.
It must have been clear to every adult that America could not be defeated. But there was a lot of enthusiasm, and then after Russia, America didn't look so terribly bad anymore.
Hitler now unleashes his hatred for America. In the German parliament, the Reichstag, he vilifies the American president as a Jew and a warmonger.
Wir wissen, welche Kraft hinter Roosevelt steht. Es ist der ewige Jude, der seine Zeit als gekommen erachtet, das auch an uns zu vollstrecken, dass wir in Sowjetrussland alle schaudern, sehen und erleben mussten. Wir haben das jüdische Paradies auf Erden nunmehr kennengelernt. Der Präsident der Vereinigten Staaten mag das vielleicht selbst nicht begreifen. Dann spricht es nur für seine geistige Beschränktheit. Wir aber wissen, dass dies das Ziel seines ganzen Kampfes ist. Auch wenn wir nicht im Bündnis mit Japan stünden, werden wir uns darüber im Klaren, dass es die Absicht der Juden und ihres Franklin Roosevelt ist, einen Staat nach dem anderen allein zu vernichten.
The new enemy is now called America. Hitler instructs Goebbels to begin a propaganda offensive against the United States. A simple message is to be hammered home to the German populace. The United States of America is an uncultured, Jewified nation ruled exclusively by monetary greed.
Die Börse ist der Tummelplatz seiner Leidenschaft, der Sucht nach Geld und Macht. Hier wird der Fleiß Millionen rechtschaffener Arbeiter in mühelosen Gewinn umgesetzt. Das ist die Welt, für die Sie kämpfen und die Sie auch in Deutschland wieder einführen wollen. Ausgespien aus den Ghettos des Ostens erschienen sie als Diebe und Hehler in der Metropole der USA. Kaftan und Pajeslocken sind abgelegt. So getarnt kann er jetzt seine schmutzigen Finger in alle üblen Geschäfte stecken. Der eigene Laden ist schnell zusammengegaunert.
The Nazis maintained that the Jews were running America, they were running the banks, they were running American politics, and Roosevelt, they claimed, was Jewish too.
In response to the German propaganda, Roosevelt commissions anti-propaganda films of his own. Made for American audiences, they present a drastic view of Hitler's plans for world domination.
Conquer Eastern Europe, and you dominate the heartland. Conquer the heartland, and you dominate the world island. Conquer the world island, and you dominate the world.
In Aryan fertility camps, according to the American propaganda, babies were being produced with the speed and efficiency of an assembly line.
Of course, the children from this assembly line belong to the state to be scientifically trained for conquest.
Hitler's declared objective, they said, was to raise the Nazi armies of tomorrow, today.
Every day in all German classrooms,
Adolf Hitler ist unser Retter, unser Held, der Edelste Führer auf der ganzen Welt. Hitler
There is growing fear in Washington of a potential threat through the many ethnic Germans who live in the United States. Roosevelt decides to put 3,000 of them in state custody. They are sent to internment camps built especially for this purpose in Texas and Florida.
If you didn't voluntarily come, you were arrested and sent there. This was not a concentration camp. This was a detention camp to take you out of the population and to supervise you and to make sure that you did not get involved in destabilizing the country. You were an enemy alien. It was under the Geneva Convention.
Germans were not the only ones interned. Japanese nationals were also detained. They spent the duration of the Second World War behind bars, as next-door neighbors in a parallel world. The American government was satisfied with the success of its security measures.
It took away a destabilizing element in the population. You didn't have people routing for Hitler on 86th Street in New York. That certainly contributed to the peace and the well-being of the country.
While America was busy defending its internal security, the German Air Force still had no planes with which it could attack the United States. Göring began pressuring Willy Messerschmitt to finally come through and deliver the America bomber the regime longed for. But Messerschmitt had to admit that his calculations were a little too optimistic.
It's not that they made false assumptions, definitely not that. They would have failed that way too, that would have been noticed. I mean, if they'd done calculations that didn't compute. But they had a range of tolerance, so they always just used the most optimistic assumptions. Others do the same thing, but there was always the chance the customer would place an order.
Messerschmitt was unable to fulfill his promise to find a way to cover the distance to the United States and back. Fearful of losing the huge contract, he presented a stopgap solution to the Reich's Air Force Ministry. It would be possible to refuel the America bomber in mid-flight with the help of another aircraft. While Messerschmitt's engineers were busy perfecting an untested technology, American assembly lines began producing the bombers the United States needed for its war against Hitler's Germany. The Americans had a decisive advantage. Their bombers didn't have to fly non-stop across the Atlantic. They could be transported first to England and set out to attack Germany from there. The new threat from the skies forces Hitler's hand. He must find a way to stop the American arms industry. Brittany, May 27, 1942. A German submarine departs from the Atlantic coast of France and heads towards the United States. On board is a troop of German agents whose mission is to carry out sabotage operations in America. The code name of the secret command troop is Pastorius. On June 13th, the submarine reaches New York's Long Island. In the dark of the early morning hours, the German agents, equipped with several kilograms of explosives, go on land. A U.S. Coast Guard agent patrolling the beach discovers the Germans. They threaten him and pay him $260, hoping to bribe him into forgetting what he has seen. The agents arrive at the nearest train station. Disguised as normal Americans, they board a commuter train to New York.
I mean, 4 people with a limited amount of dynamite, with a limited amount of access to really worthwhile targets, was not going to make much difference. And I think it was more psychologically the Germans wanted to do it to show what they could do. It would not have been an effective way of in any way slowing the war effort.
The Coast Guard informs the FBI that the Nazis have smuggled a command troop of agents into the country. The group is believed to be in New York. The FBI immediately cranks up the largest manhunt in American history, but to no avail. The agents take rooms in a luxury hotel. Once there, Presenting himself as a defector capable of revealing the Nazi sabotage plans, their leader, John Dash, discloses the entire planned operation to the FBI. The other agents are subsequently arrested. Dash also informs the FBI about the impending arrival of additional sabotage commandos.
For sabotage material buried by Nazi agents landed from a U-boat on the coast of Florida, and the boxes are found by the FBI. 4 saboteurs came ashore here, while 4 others were secretly landed on Long Island. The boxes contain material investigated by the FBI. TNT for sabotage explosions.
I think it was a useless operation which used resources not very wisely. The people themselves were not extremely competent. They were not professionals. They were not particularly well trained. They didn't exactly know what they're supposed to do. They did have contacts. Those contacts, unfortunately, also suffered afterwards from their experience, and they were very quickly eliminated.
FBI Chief Hoover takes advantage of this opportunity to remind the American people to be even more vigilant.
Other saboteurs may try to come to our shores. They must be stopped. We ask every citizen to immediately report any information regarding espionage, sabotage, or un-American activities to the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Hoover was the big guy. He found him. Never mind that the man came in and gave himself up and gave him all the details. He wanted all the credit, and he got all of the credit.
But there was one detail Hoover kept from the public, that the agents had a second mission, to carry out acts of terrorism in the heart of New York as part of an effort to shock the American public.
If a bomb had gone off at Macy's, or a bomb would have gone off in Grand Central Station, it would have caused a certain amount of worry and a certain amount of public hysteria.
Hitler's terrorist agents received harsh sentences, meant to discourage others from attempting anything similar. Except for John Dash and another defector, they were all sentenced to death. Augsburg Airfield, December 23, 1942. The day has finally arrived. 6 months later than originally planned, Messerschmitt's America bomber is ready for its inaugural flight. Under test pilot Karl Bauer, the first flight is successful. But before long, its lightweight construction intended to guarantee the plane can fly the long distance to America presents problems.
Messerschmitt's Flugzeuge waren immer am leichtesten.
Messerschmitt's planes were always the most lightweight, but they were always pushing the limit as far as size is concerned. And this also proved to be the case when the 264 was tested. The engines tended to fall off, or other parts occasionally failed to operate properly due to their extreme lightweight construction. Basically no problem. That's how you get the lightest planes, by not reinforcing everything. And that was Messerschmitt's principle, to build them as lightweight as possible. And if something falls apart or proves to be too weak, then it would be reinforced.
The authorities at the Reich's Air Force Ministry began to have their doubts about Messerschmitt's promises. Göring decided the Air Force needed to entertain new plans about how to bomb the United States. In a secret meeting on March 15, 1943, the air travel experts of the Third Reich discussed novel ways of attacking the United States of America. A young colonel named Victor von Lossberg suggested an extraordinary operation. He said he would like to fly a special mission to drop 8-ton bombs throughout New York City.
Da gab es Ideen, das Ganze mit einem Wasserflugzeug zu machen.
There were ideas such as doing the whole thing with a seaplane. Blohm & Voss had built the 222, I think it was. That was already capable of flying tremendous distances and could start and land even in 3-meter waves. So that meant it was conceivable, for example, to fly with a full load to a distance about 1,000 kilometers off the coastline, where a submarine would be waiting to supply the logistics, such as fuel and cargo, in other words, bombs, and the plane would then have no problem flying the final 1,000 kilometers and attacking the target. Let's say it was New York, return, refuel again, and fly home.
The generals expressed interest in Losberg's plan, especially after he said, in response to a question, that his goal would be to hit symbolic targets. Among others, he would aim for the Jewish neighborhood.
The way the Nazis thought, they were as much interested in propaganda as they were in effective action. It would have created in America a certain amount of lack of confidence in the government being able to protect the population. The way the 11/9 attack, the 9/11 attack, the effect of the 9/11 attack was more of why weren't you able to tell about it beforehand and protect us from it? And the same thing would have happened with this.
Losberg's risky plan of attack was approved. But due to unfavorable weather conditions, the mission had to be postponed until the spring of 1944. By that time, however, the United States had largely succeeded in driving the German submarines away from its coasts. It was too late for Losberg's plan. While the German Air Force could only dream of bombing America, American bombers had long since conquered the skies over Germany. They blanketed German cities and industrial centers with bombs. Hitler was livid about the failure of his Air Force and accused Goering of incompetence. He ordered his armaments minister Albert Speer to come up with alternative ways to mount an assault on America. Hitler's headquarters, Volschanze, July 7, 1943. It was on this day that Albert Speer brought two up-and-coming rocket engineers to meet Hitler. Their names were Werner von Braun and Walter Dornberger. The two showed Hitler a secret film that would radically change his war plans with regard to America. The film showed the liftoff of a rocket that would shortly thereafter be named the V-2, and with which the German army would target England beginning in 1944. Hitler was impressed by the film. With a rocket like this, at least in the visionary plans of Dornberger and von Braun, it would soon be possible to launch an attack on America. Fascinated by this daring plan, Hitler made rocket research and development top priority. Dornberger and von Braun achieved their goal. In their project center on the island of Peenemünde, they began developing the A-10, an intercontinental rocket designed to attack the United States. But the American Secret Service got wind of the plan.
It was possible that they might have a rocket that could go all the way from Germany to America. And by the time we figured out that they might work on that, we had pretty well found out where the rockets were made and where the paths were from which they were sent. And we bombed the sites.
On August 18, 1943, bombs rained down on the Peenemünde research facilities. Hitler immediately placed the execution of the secret rocket project under the direct responsibility of SS Chief Heinrich Himmler. It was he who developed Project Cement. The plans called for a huge kilometers-long production plant to be built underground in order to protect it from Allied bombing raids. In Austria's Salzkammergut region, and under the direction of the SS, work began on one of the largest construction sites of the Third Reich.
When we got to Ebensee to work in a quarry, there were 1,000 of us. After 2 months, only 500 of us were left. The others died of hunger and cold, and from the long hours of hard work. It was always cold. It was always either raining or snowing.
Within a short period of time, Himmler had several thousand laborers brought to Ebensee. The captives were forced to work 24 hours a day under inhumane conditions, blasting tunnels into the mountainside for the America rocket.
I had a friend. His name was Nikolai. He was 17 years old. It was his first day. He was killed when a heavy stone fell on him. Things like that happened often.
SS brigade leader Hans Kammler drove the work at Ebensee mercilessly forward. The rocket researchers at Peenemünde looked on as hundreds of forced laborers were worked to death. That was the only way the engineers' monstrous rocket project could take shape. Installed in one of the tunnels was an 18 meters tall assembly room for the future America rocket. But even worse than the forced labor in the tunnels was the cement camp in which the prisoners were held. Those who collapsed under the brutal working conditions were systematically removed and housed in the so-called hospital block. There, the SS allowed them to slowly starve to death. Of the prisoners who survived the torturous work conditions at Ebensee, a few occasionally tried to escape. These attempts were brutally punished.
2 Russians tried to escape. They caught up with them and released dogs on them. The dogs tore them apart until they were dead. Then they brought their bodies to the gate of the camp and left them there for everybody to see. Like a monument, those gates were.
More than 8,000 forced laborers died in Ebensee, trying to fulfill the insane dreams of the Nazi engineers. 7 kilometers of the underground tunnel system were finished. But then the military situation brought a sudden end to the secret project. Orders came from the Armaments Ministry. From now on, instead of modern intercontinental rockets, the underground factories would produce synthetic fuel. The reason? The Americans had located the central weakness of Hitler's war machine: fuel production. Since May 1944, the Allies had been targeting German refineries. It was the beginning of a new strategy that was developed by the U.S. Secret Service, and it would ultimately decide the war.
Intelligence is based on many things. It's based on open sources, reading newspapers, on listening to radio, on information you get from diplomatic sources, and information you get from intelligence agents. And these are all put together. And to some extent, a lot of the information we analyzed during the war were based on what we knew the Germans industrially were able to do.
Arms Minister Speer warned Hitler. In a secret Reich document, he estimated the loss of German fuel production at 90%. That meant, Speer said, that the military defeat of the Third Reich was now just a matter of a few months. The lack of fuel quickly became evident. The planes of the Luftwaffe were grounded, allowing the Allies to attack German airfields unhindered. Coincidentally, they also happened to destroy the prototype of Messerschmitt's America bomber without ever having learned about the existence of the project. In response to the bombing raids and the imminent military defeat, Speer summoned the Third Reich's weapons manufacturers. At a secret arms conference, Hitler made a speech to the industrial leaders. He painted a rosy picture of a future with huge markets for them to sell their wares.
Wenn dieser Krieg mit unserem Sieg entschieden ist, dann wird die Privatinitiative der deutschen Wirtschaft ihre größte Epoche erleben. Der Staat, der die Politik hier gestaltet und führt, ist verpflichtet, für die Wirtschaft machtmäßig das sicherzustellen, was sie benötigt, um auf längste Sicht unentwegt und stetig arbeiten zu können. Mein Streben muss immer dahin gehen, die tüchtigsten Köpfe herauszuschnüffeln und zu suchen. Und ich schnuppere dauernd herum und ich habe förmliche Agenten, die nur immer aufpassen, wo ist ein Talent, wo ist ein Genie. Die Menschen werden sofort geholt und die bekommen die Aufträge.
The idea behind Hitler's speech, he wanted to inspire the engineers to greater achievements, hoping they would finally come through with new, radically different weapons. Bad Eilsen, fall 1944. An important visitor has made an appointment with the engineering office of the Focke-Wulf factories. Dr. Fritz Nallinger, the chief of development for the defense contractor Daimler-Benz. Following the demise of Messerschmitt's America bomber, Nallinger senses his opportunity to win big. He wants to present Hitler with a new America bomber and thereby ensure that Daimler-Benz becomes the leading arms manufacturer of the Third Reich. To achieve this goal, he needs the cooperation of Professor Kurt Tank, the chief engineer of the Focke-Wulf factories. Tank's reputation is legendary. Before the war started, he built in record time a passenger plane that was capable of flying non-stop across the Atlantic, the so-called Condor. Now he is to build a new America bomber for Mercedes as fast as possible.
Tank hatte natürlich den Vorteil, dass selber
Tank had the advantage that he was a pilot himself. He broke in the plane himself, which meant he had direct feedback and was able to transfer his own experience and, of course, what he felt himself as a pilot into the best possible construction. And there he was, a genius of a man, I must say. And some of what he did was also very avant-garde. It grew out of his own genius and his understanding of how a plane should fly.
But first, Tank must deal with the familiar problem of distance. How can he build a plane capable of flying all the way to America and back? In Bad Eilsen, Nallinger and Tank discuss new, radical thoughts. What if one dispensed with the flight back?
Of course, his idea was to fly the Condor over, drop the bombs, and then jump out with a parachute. There was a definite chance of survival. It was an equipment loss, as they used to call it, but the pilot would be saved.
Yet another problem arose. The Condor was already getting on in years and was now much too slow to withstand the new generation of American fighter planes. The German pilot was sure to be shot down long before he ever reached the United States. For the attack to succeed, they would need a faster bomber. Nallinger promised the solution. Daimler-Benz was already working on jet engines. Berlin, winter 1944. Generals and pilots of the Luftwaffe meet at the height of the war to exchange thoughts and the latest information. For quite a while now, rumors of heroic acts of flying have been making the rounds. Some pilots had managed to bring down American bombers using a so-called ramming maneuver. They flew their small fighter planes right up behind the American bombers. Defying death, they used their propellers like circular saws to slice through the bombers' tails. The planes fell from the sky like ripe fruit. Most of these heroic stories were nothing but propaganda. Instead of saving themselves by bailing out with a parachute, most German pilots died when their planes crashed to the ground. Most of the Allied bombers were able to continue flying, even after being rammed. The German Luftwaffe saw the ramming attacks as welcome proof of the heroic dedication demonstrated by German pilots in the fateful battle for the Reich. When Mercedes development chief Dr. Fritz Nallinger learned of these assessments, he suddenly knew how to solve the distance problem of his America bomber. Reichs Air Force Ministry, January 19, 1945. On this day, Daimler-Benz Chief of Development, Dr. Fritz Nallinger, introduces the America Bomber Project to Goering's entire Chiefs of Staff. The solution for an attack on America, Nallinger says, is the so-called piggyback method. Tests had shown that it was possible to use a large cargo plane to bring smaller planes to their target areas, where they would disengage and continue independently. As soon as Nallinger projects the engineer's draft of his bomber onto the wall, it becomes clear what the underwriting idea for his project is. It is the use of manned bombs steered by suicide pilots to produce maximum destruction of their targets.
It was a radical new way of thinking that was actually quite inhuman. I must say that's something one just cannot do. It goes against every sense of justice and is the origin of terror. I will lay my own life on the line, 100%, if it means I can kill many times as many people someplace else.
The project wins approval. It is January 1945, 4 months before the war's end.
I think Hitler had all kinds of dreams of glory and dreams of hate. And I can well imagine him imagining that New York was being bombed and firebombed and destroyed and the skyscrapers falling into the street. He was a dreamer of considerable ability. He dreamed of a lot of things. And I think that was one of his good hate dreams he had.
From the diary of Albert Speer.
I remember how in the Reich headquarters he had them show the films of London burning, the clouds of fire above Warsaw, and the exploding convoys. And I recall the greed that filled him each time. I never saw him so beside himself as he was towards the end of the war, when, in his delirium, he fantasized how it would be when New York went down in a sea of flames. He described how the skyscrapers would transform themselves into gigantic burning torches, how they would collapse on each other, and how the exploding city would reflect against the dark of the night sky.
The America bomber was never put into action, but the German suicide pilots were actually recruited. In order to stave off the approach of the Red Army, they crashed into the bridges over the River Oder. A shared farewell letter has been retained for posterity.
Und der Abschiedsbrief lautet nun wie folgt.
And the farewell letter reads as follows.
Kameraden,
Comrades,
heute 19:48
at 7:48 p.m. today,
erfüllt sich
we will fulfill
unser
our
Schicksal.
destiny.
Wir geben uns
We volunteer ourselves for our Führer,
freiwillig,
for our homeland,
für unseren Führer,
for Germany.
für unsere Heimat, für
Heil to
Deutschland.
you, comrades.
Heil euch, Kameraden.
And they all signed it.
Da haben sie alle unterschrieben.
The suicide deaths of the pilots were totally senseless. One day after they crashed into them, the Red Army reconstructed the bridges. But the careers of Hitler's engineers continued long after the end of the war. Professor Willy Messerschmitt developed new aircraft for the German army. Werner von Braun built the first moon rocket for the United States. Professor Kurt Tank went to Argentina and designed jet airplanes for Perón. Dr. Fritz Nallinger was elected to the board of Daimler-Benz and was awarded the Order of Merit of the Federal Republic of Germany in 1954.